Hello, everyone. Welcome to ULA 2020 Fall Workshop. We will begin right at 10 a.m. and give people time to log in. Hello, everyone who's logging in right now. Thank you so much for being early. Welcome to the ULA Fall Workshop. We will begin right at 10 a.m. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ULA Fall Workshop. We will begin right at 10 a.m. and give everyone a chance to log in.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Daniel Mockley, and I'm Utah Library Association President, and the Continuing Education Committee has asked that I kick things off this morning. My dear friends and colleagues, I warmly welcome you to our 2020 Virtual Fall Workshop. I sincerely hope that you glean some great info today from each other. I'm pleased we are able to have a ULA-wide professional development event again after sadly missing the 2020 Spring Conference. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I express our regret of not being able to meet together in person today, and we are anxious for the time that we can do so again. Making this awesome lemonade out of the lemons that we have today has been no small feat. I express great appreciation to Valerie Buck and Aaron Mendoza, our Continuing Education Committee chairs, Liz Gabbitas, our Program Board Chair, and so many others involved in this production today. There has been a lot of learning and prep leading up to today, and much will be going on behind the scenes. You are wonderful. Thank you for making this event possible. My parting thoughts this morning rest heavily on conversations I've had with various librarians in the past month particularly. In each of our spheres, I can feel a little of the weight of the burdens that you are carrying, and I also carry my own. The short-term optimism and the unknowns of the early pandemic have settled into long-term tests of our perseverance. Stress in a large variety and quantity of forms has come upon each of us in our schools, universities, communities, and our own personal lives. I know you are exhausted. I'm exhausted, and that is okay. I hope that if you haven't been able to, that at some point soon, each of us can take a short sanity retreat in whatever and however form that you can. We all need those times of refreshing, and it is not weakness. It's natural. 6 months has been a long time. And I actually pat all of you on the back that we have come this far. I do have a firm hope that we'll be able to continue through it to the other side. I mentioned the term perseverance, and I feel that this term is very fitting for our current experience. It is the act or power to continue to do something in spite of difficulties. That's how Merriam-Webster puts it. We will not be the same after we have weathered COVID. I think we'll be better. Absence has made my heart grow fonder. Gratitude for the return of lost experiences may grow brighter. We will be prepared, wiser, and overall a little better as people and as librarian staff. Because of this opposition, it will be so because we will persevere. We will be transformed in some fashion, not because of how we perfectly managed our various crises, but because we continued through it to the other side at all. My colleagues and my friends, don't give up. Get some rest when you can. Get through the day. You are doing better than I think you give yourself credit for. There is the other side. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in person there as soon as I can. I and the ULA leadership sincerely wish you the best. Have a wonderful day learning with us. Thank you for being here today. I now turn the time over to our great immediate past president, Vern Waters, to introduce our morning keynote speaker. Thank you.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I was thinking on my way into my office this morning about how a year ago we were up in Brigham City, beautiful fall day up there. It was wonderful to be able to meet in person. And that day we had no idea what was ahead of us. It's just incredible what has happened over the last year. Just so interesting to me that we've gotten to this point. So when we were looking at keynote speakers for the spring conference, we had lined up a speaker for the author lunch, and it turned out that the week of our conference, she had a book that was supposed to come out. She was rivaling a book from Stephanie Meyer, I believe. And so she tried to get her book pushed to a different date, and time, and that didn't happen. And I asked her if she could recommend someone, and she very graciously recommended Christian to us. And I was so excited to have the opportunity to start talking to Christian and working with Christian. I've been working on a couple of books currently, and he's a really fine author. And shortly after he had expressed that he was willing and interested in being a part of our conference, we found out his wonderful news about his Newbery Honor winning book, The Scary Stories for Young Foxes. I wanted to share something. I was going to have had this with me down in St. George. When the pandemic first hit, I asked my boss if I could get a plague doctor mask, and she said that that was not in our mission, didn't really express our message. And I don't know why not. I think the plague doctors did wonderful work. I don't know. Anyway, so it's my pleasure to turn the time over to Christian. Christian McKay Heidicker reads and writes and drinks tea between his demon hunting cat, whom we may get a glimpse of. We saw the cat yesterday for just a moment. Between the demon hunting cat and his fiddling red-headed fiance, he feels completely protected from evil spirits. Christian is the author of the Newbery Honor-winning Scary Stories for Young Foxes, Thieves of Weirdwood, Cure for the Common Universe, and Attack of the 50-Foot Wallflower. He lives in Salt Lake City, Utah. Please join me in welcoming Christian McKay Heidicker to our fall workshop. Thank you so much.
Good morning, librarians, wonderful, wonderful librarians, and thank you so much for having me. I only wish that I could see your smiling, scowling, or completely neutral faces this morning. I don't want to make any assumptions about how you're feeling. I do want to take a second to thank Vern Waters and Jessica Day George for thinking of me before anybody in the world knew who I was. I looked at the previous speaker when they asked if I wanted to come and talk to you this morning. I was like, Shannon Hale? Okay, yeah, I'll follow that act. That's fine. Those aren't huge shoes to fill. So I'm just glad that my book could win a Newbery Honor so that I at least feel comfortable speaking to you this morning. Today I wanted to talk to you a bit about how I have been looking at children's literature. And a little while from now, I'm going to ask for everybody's feedback. So if you want to jump onto the chat and give me some answers to my questions, I would greatly appreciate it. And then at the end of the speech, I'm going to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have some questions, some cues that start bubbling up in your mind while I'm speaking, then please jot them down and throw them at me at the end. So my career has benefited greatly from dissection. This started in the early days when I made the mistake that most amateur authors make, which is that I thought that if I could just get all of the wonderful and exciting pictures in my head down onto paper, then everybody else would have the exact same feelings and sense of awe that I had of everything that goes on inside of my mind. Of course, what I didn't realize is that, our brains tend toward cliche, and lots of people have had those initial thoughts because we're basically just drawing from the fertilizer that comes from reading all of these other books, and then we're like, aha, here's a new idea. Nobody's ever had this before. And everybody's like, no, that's totally normal. And I thought that using a formula for my fiction was cheating. I thought that would make it predictable and bland and kind of fall flat like a lot of the Marvel movies that we see these days that have these repeating formulas that we see over and over again. Some of them are wonderful. Don't at me, please. I wasn't selling anything. I didn't actually get any of my work out there by falling in love with my own dream stuff and just putting it out. And so I decided to take a chance on a formula, and I picked up Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. And I started just plugging the events of my stories into his tried and true screenplay formula. Here's Lucifer Morningstar saying hello. Thanks, Lucy. And it worked. I started selling things. And I realized that the human heart understands stories in a particular way. It only accepts certain shapes of stories. And that if you can fine tune your story so that it ticks like a Swiss watch that follows the rhythm of the human subconsciousness, then you will be able to speak to other readers' hearts. You will actually be able to take all of these tangled, wonderful images that are inside of your head and get them to resonate with other people in the world. And so I started to become obsessed with that and studying the hero's journey or Dan Harmon's story circles, and just really starting to see the skeletal structure of books and stories and movies and everything that I consumed so that it could stand up by itself and it could walk around. Of course, you don't just want to have a bare skeleton walking around. So I was also in that time developing the musculature and the tendons and ligaments and all of those other pieces by dissecting sentences and by devouring books like Strunk and White and Dreyer's English and all of these books that talk about, easy little tricks, like putting the most important part of the sentence at the end so that it impacts more than anything, and taking a sentence that just falls flat and doesn't do anything and turning it and twisting it and cutting out those adjectives until it sings and it pulls you in. And it does the work of moving this skeleton that you have underneath. I have benefited from some amazingly kind people in my life, a very good poet friend of mine, fiance, other good friends who have been kind enough to read my work out loud to me whenever I finish chapters. And this is if any of you are aspiring writers, I cannot recommend this highly enough. It is the most horrifying thing that you can do with your work. I promise you. It's excruciating to hear your words out loud. And I sit by with a notebook and a pen, and I'm like, ooh, not that. Make that sound better. Okay, she sort of tripped over that line, that's my fault, or this doesn't sound the way that I would read it in my head, or all these words or repetitions. And so this was a process of slowly and meticulously sliding every word, sentence, paragraph, page across the chopping block of my mind to see if it actually stood up to what I expected of myself. So yeah, we have a skeleton, we have musculature and ligaments and everything. And let's just say that, the publisher takes care of skin and all of that stuff by packaging it and making it look really pretty. And I've obviously been extremely lucky in that regard, having amazing artists and cover designers and distribution and all of those things. But I think the moment that my work started to take off was when I looked at the soul of stories. You can have a really solid structure. You can have really beautiful sentences that sound like poetry and read like water. But those can still feel empty. Those can still just be a corpse walking around with no particular place to go. When I started working on Scary Stories for Young Foxes, I made the same mistake that I made when I was first starting out, which was that I sat down and I was like, okay, what is scary to me? I had this idea, right, where I was going to take classic horror tales and I was going to find parallels in the scientifically accurate fox world and combine them. And I'll get to the specifics of that in just a second. When I sat down originally, I said, all right, what's scary to me? What horrifies me? And I would type it out and I would be like, ooh, this is chilling. Ooh, this is creepy. Not really thinking about the fact that, you know, scary things are extremely subjective. I'm sure that you've had that experience where you've read a book or watched a movie and told somebody else like, oh my gosh, you have to check this out. It's horrifying. And they're like, seriously, that walk in the park, that's nothing. And so I really wanted these stories to have some bite to them. I really wanted them to have an impact and not just be, you know, the like pleasant chill that we get on Halloween sometimes. Even though I was writing them in honor of the Berenstain Bears books, I was like, we need to have this grow up. I need to separate myself from those. And so I started to dissect why we tell certain scary stories. If you've heard me talk about this in a different interview, because I've talked about it in many different places, fear not, I'm going to get it over with really quickly, and then we're going to get to the heart of my talk today. But I you know, looked at a zombie story, for example, and I asked, why do we tell zombie stories? Why are people so obsessed with them? Yeah, they're creepy, but what is happening underneath the surface? And I realized when reading a book about the siege of Leningrad, and reading this account of a woman who talked about after the siege had started and people had really started to starve, that her neighbor, whom she once trusted and loved and could walk over and borrow some eggs from, now became an enemy. They became somebody that she couldn't trust, because if she had food and they did not, they could kill her. And I thought, that's a zombie story. That's a moment where a loved one has a disease, has a change in their brain, has starvation, has political motivations, whatever, has a dark side, and they change on you. They become something unrecognizable. When I considered ghost stories, I realized that our ghost stories are our way of dealing with the past. They are our way of addressing things that still haunt us and won't leave us alone. And until we look at this part of our past and turn it inside out, we're going to be we will continue to be haunted by these things. I looked at vampire stories, and I realized that vampires are a sort of seduction into darkness, right? Even the things that can really hurt you in the world, even the things that can kill you, still have an allure to them. I think that drugs are a vampire story. I think that some people in our lives are vampire stories. This is a way, I genuinely think that that's kind of why, vampires have received this sexy cred over the last couple of decades, because we are just so intrigued by the unknown, right? Or by the darkness. So there's just a few examples from Scary Stories for Young Foxes. And the great benefit that I had from that is not only did I understand like what was happening in the foundation of the story and what the story was doing to the reader subconsciously, and everything that was going on under the surface that would bubble up and genuinely make it something that was unsettling, because it was about us, because it reveals patterns in human behavior. But beyond that, I could make them as scary as I wanted and know that I was doing it for a reason. There was no part of me that wanted to go in and just disturb kids and their parents with these stories of horror without having a reason behind it, right? If you're going to get dark, then you'd better be saying something. And it wasn't until I found those answers sitting in the heart of each of these scary stories that they really started to blossom and have reason to exist. So recently, to lighten things up again from this discussion of horror stories, I have turned my eyes on fantasy and looking at what ticks under the surface, and how that all bubbles up and changes us when we read fantasy books. And earlier this month, I went and taught a class at something called Teen Author Boot Camp, where there's just a whole bunch of aspiring teens, or teen aspiring writers who are coming, for advice on how to become the next great Brandon Sanderson or whatever. And I wanted to give them something that was extremely valuable. I wanted them to walk away with their perception of how they approached fantasy being completely turned on its head. And this is how I did it. And I'm going to ask for you to start hopping in with answers in just a second. So I told them, these teens, that I think that when most fantasy authors first start looking at wanting to be an author themselves, they look at the book that made them feel that like cozy excitement in their hearts, and they think, okay, the book that I loved as a kid that just like ignited this passion in me and made me just want to live there for all time had elves and castles in it. So I am going to put elves and castles in my book, and then that will do the same thing to my readers. Mwaha, solved it, right? And I told them, and only a few of them actually got this reference, but I told them that that was kind of like tasting one of Mary Berry's cakes and like just being transformed by it, like taste buds ignited, stomach feeling like, you're a little kid again, and just every single fiber of your being just like tingling with sensation and being alive. And looking at it and being like, okay, well, she put some frosting on there, and I know that there's carrot in that cake. So I will just go ahead and throw all those things in, and it will be great. And then Paul Hollywood tries it, and you know, does that very intimidating, like staring at the baking table for a really long time, then looking up at you and telling you that it's dry and awful. And it's because you don't realize everything that went into it, like the inspiration behind the cake, the understanding of flavor combinations, the fine tuning of every single piece of or every single aspect of flavor within that cake. So I started to challenge them to look under the surface of their favorite fantasy books. So to get your participation, I'm going to have you help me create a list of the most famous fantasy, and we can mix in some sci-fi authors as well, of all time. And we're talking so big that like these teens' grandparents would have heard of them, right? Or might have heard of them. It's extremely possible. So go ahead and start jumping in at any time. C.S. Lewis, great. J.R.R. Tolkien, I think I've heard of him. L. Frank Baum, that's a really interesting one. Ooh, Mary Shelley, that's good. J.K. Rowling, great. And I'm just going to take a second really quickly that we are just discussing, oh, you guys are fast. George R.R. Martin. We are just discussing people's work right now. Oh, I should have left some room. It's cool. Okay. Ooh, Diana Wynne Jones is really good. I'm gonna skip that one though. Asimov is wonderful. I'm gonna throw in Orson Scott Card. Let's do Frank Herbert. I've never done Frank Herbert. And just because the kids threw this one in before, and it's a really surprising one, even though it kind of breaks our rules. I'm gonna put in George Lucas, Neil Gaiman for sure. Fantastic. Okay, I think that actually has got us. Marvelous. You might have to excuse my handwriting here, and I am going to ask for your feedback again in just a second. And I do want to say, like, really quickly, I have so much to say about figures like J.K. Rowling and Orson Scott Card, but we'll just talk about their work today and excuse, maybe some of the other less tasteful things they have done with their positions in the world. Okay, I just want to check. Oh, I'm going to do Q&A in like 12 minutes. So we got to move. Okay. So what I asked these kids was, instead of telling me what sort of stories these people write, because there were probably some that inspired these kids, I want to ask you, and I think you're going to be good at this because you're librarians, I want to ask you what they read instead. Let's start with C.S. Lewis right at the top. What does C.S. Lewis read? The Bible. Absolutely. And fairy tales for sure. Marvelous. How about Tolkien? Nerdy linguistic stuff. Awesome, Abigail. Did you have to say nerdy, though? I'm just kidding. How about Mary Shelley, before she was writing Frankenstein? J.R. Tolkien did read Lewis, and he didn't like him at all. He really didn't like Narnia, which is amazing. She did read some metaphysical stuff for sure. Yeah. But what specifically inspired Frankenstein? What did she read before? Electricity, anatomy, science articles. Exactly. Okay, we're going to skip J.K. Rowling really quickly because I think hers is the most interesting. George R.R. Martin. Battles, yes. Specifically, what type of battles and where? History, exactly. European history. Okay, Asimov is tricky. He's really, really tricky. How about Orson Scott Card? That one's going to be tricky. Specifically, War of the Roses. Absolutely, Melanie. Orson Scott Card? I'm hoping that I stump you with a couple of these because Book of Mormon, absolutely, definitely, and that is one of the biggest answers. I'm looking for one other thing. Definitely read Asimov. I mean, all of these people read fantasy in some form or another, right? But what specifically inspired, say, Ender's Game? Yes, I love stumping you guys. That's the best. He read Military Strategy. Okay, marvelous. How about Joe? I'm going to skip Frank Herbert because his is, I think he's kind of like an Asimov where they pulled from so many different sources that it's kind of hard to pin down. George Lucas, and I'm just going to be very specific here. Definitely Hero's Journey, definitely Arthurian Legends. I'm going to say, what movies did he watch? And that if you watch this person's movies and then watch Star Wars, you'll be like, holy crap, George Lucas, boom. Samurai movies, Hidden Fortress, Akira Kurosawa, specifically. Marvelous. And second to last, Neil Gaiman. Super easy one, right? Fairy tales and mythology, specifically mythology, absolutely The Jungle Book. Okay, and what I think, definitely comic books, what I think is the most intriguing or the most interesting of all of these, and nobody ever gets this, what did J.K. Rowling read? What was like the biggest inspiration for Harry Potter that actually gives away what genre Harry Potter is? Because I would argue that it's not fantasy. There's definitely some Greek mythology in there. There's definitely some Jane Austen, Dickens. I mean, she read everything. But what genre is Harry Potter? I know you want to say fantasy, and I'm going to make my argument for why it's not. British boarding school vibes. It's my new band. Mystery. Jessica Sandberg just got it. Harry Potter is a mystery, right? Every single volume is an individual, like, whodunit, or what's going on with this character, or where do we find this? But even book 3 is, you know, like, what is the secret behind Lupin? You know, what's happening with Hermione? I'm trying to think of the other mysteries there. So each one acts as its own individual mystery with a big reveal in the end. You know, it was Professor Quirrell, who is Tom Riddle, et cetera, et cetera. And then the entire series functions as one long mystery, right? Like, why does Harry Potter speak Parseltongue? Why does he have the scar? And what's his connection to Lord Voldemort? Basically, what I'm telling these kids, or what I'm showing them, is that the soul of the thing that has moved millions and millions of people. And I don't think that we can argue that this list of humans, of authors, are like the titans of mystery, right? And the fascinating thing is that I think the seed of what makes their stuff so engaging and so far-reaching is actually that they are not reading fantasy at all. Because I think what happens with young authors is they read only fantasy, they cherry pick the things from the surface and put them in, and they expect it to have the same sort of impact that these do. And I've shown them that with all of these pieces, the source or the inspiration dictates the magic system. You know, there's this obsession these days about creating these complicated magic systems that you just spin from the well of your mind and just come up with something because it sounds cool, as opposed to saying, okay, you know what, fairy tales have their own specific, extremely veiled rules, and all of the things that I am going to put in these stories is going to be based around those rules. C.S. Lewis, if it happens in the Bible, it can happen in Narnia, easy. George R.R. Martin's is super interesting because, you know, so much of the magic in that book happens off screen, which means that the magic is based on almost hearsay, right? And that's how it was during the War of the Roses times, is that you would hear that something insane happened in a battle that couldn't possibly happen. And then there's a question, did it happen? And for many, many of the things in George R.R. Martin's world, we don't know. Of course, when the HBO series was created, they had to give us visual approximations of all of these fantastical things. But you know, essentially, like, that's how that works. All of Harry Potter stuff, like, we know that you can go through and poke holes in the consistency of usage of magic in the Harry Potter series, but it doesn't matter because at its base, it's a mystery. And so long as it's checking those boxes, she can do whatever she wants with the magic because that is functioning as a surface element. And I love this stuff. I would really, really like to see more young authors and more fantasy books drawing from different wells that aren't just creating a shadow of a great fantasy book that actually had its heart in linguistics and not just elves are cool. So I'm so sad because I'm running out of time and I haven't even gotten to the most important part of this talk today, but I'm going to try to wrap it up really quickly. I'm working on a new fantasy book and it's going to be a while before I put it out because I can take my sweet time with it and I'm very excited. And I've been looking at a lot of the fantasy tropes that we use. A lot of those things that we just sort of dismiss as being fairy tale fodder or being, you know, just things that we experience when we crack open books. And I'm starting to look at the idea that it's possible that instead of the world borrowing from fantasy when we dress up like Harry Potter characters or we imagine having the Force or any of those things, that it's actually the other way around. That fantasy is borrowing from real life and disguising it in such a way that we cannot recognize it. It feels something other, even though the veil that covers it is so thin that it doesn't take much to see what's happening under the surface. And I think the best example that I've heard when talking to my dear friend Matthew Kirby about this stuff is he said, we all think that curses don't exist. Curses are just something that a witch casts on a prince in a fairy tale. But if you've ever had somebody say something so cruel to you that it changed your perception of yourself, that it maybe even changed how you carried yourself, and it affected your behavior and how you interacted with other people for years to come because it happened when you were a kid, how is that not a curse? Beyond that, we would think that a chanting that would move millions of people to all mindlessly follow the same instructions or do whatever the chanter commanded is also something that only exists within the realm of fantasy. But what about commercial jingles? What about something that's so catchy it will make millions of people buy the exact same toothpaste? You can look at this from so many different perspectives. It's fascinating to think that the word spell, to cast a spell, is the same word as to spell something, right? We are constantly casting spells on each other. We are lifting each other up with our words. We are tearing each other down. We have an immense amount of power within our words, right? And if you go back and you look at the history of fantasy, you'll recognize that that's mostly what wizards are doing. People get frustrated that Gandalf doesn't just like summon, lightning bolts or gigantic birds to come in and swoop them up and save them. Really, all he's doing is he's talking. He's casting a spell on Frodo by building him up and telling him he has more bravery than he realizes. He reads the text around, the entrance to Mines of Moria, and he speaks friend, and it opens. It's the same thing with the word grammar, which comes from the same root as the word grimoire, right? There's a certain order in which you can put text that will transform another person just by listening to it, just by watching it. So I've been examining the power that those magical pieces have, and I realized that by doing this amount of dissection, that I can leave, all of the pieces like bloody and disassembled all over the surgery table, and that, I need to bring them back together again, and I need to give them a cohesion and everything. And I would say that that is the art of writing. It's understanding all of these pieces that you've taken apart and bringing them back together so that you can affect the reader, so that you can change them for the better forever without them always knowing just how you did it. Okay, great. Hit me with your questions. We got about 7 minutes, and thank you for letting me go a few minutes over. What do you do to get started on a project when feeling frozen that you'll do it wrong? Oh man, that's a really fantastic question. I just do it wrong. There's no harm in doing it wrong. I go in, and in fact, I tell myself, I give myself permission to mess it up. Go do it poorly. I'm giving you permission, Katrina. I think that doing it wrong is one of the steps. And the sooner you recognize that messing it up will give you many, many, many answers that you did not have before, then great. You can always discard drafts, right? Yeah, it's just give yourself permission to make it bad. Are there stories that you deemed were too scary for scary stories for young foxes? And would you pursue writing a similar book for adults so you could utilize those too scary stories? That is fascinating. I have, no, and I think that it's because so many of these things are events that you would actually see in planet Earth. And I hate to say it, but like the sequel, I kind of love to say it, the sequel to Scary Stories, which I'm working on now, is way scarier, like way scarier. But because, like I said, I'm plunging to those depths and understanding why we tell these stories, I feel comfortable with presenting it to kids. I have an idea for an adult horror book, but we'll see what happens. I don't know. We'll see. Great question. What do I read? So I read right now. I'm reading Piranesi by Susanna Clark, and I love it. And she also wrote Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I highly recommend that you all read it. I really love Ted Chiang. I really love N.K. Jemisin. There's a lot of stuff. I read tons of stuff. Comic books. I'm excited to read Shamila Mendez's Furia, which I just picked up, and I'm going to be interviewing her on October 2nd. Can you give any hints about your new fantasy book or other works? So I am working on Scary Stories 2, which is takes place in the city. And I have a graphic novel on the horizon called The Hound of Roslyn Castle, which is a retelling of a Scottish ghost story. And I'm going to keep my lips sealed about the fantasy book for the time being, although I do think that it's got some really, I'm excited. The premise is cool. What's your best defense for when people try to say that books for kids should never be scary? There's this amazing Neil Gaiman quote that says, when you protect people, young people, from the dark things of the world, then you are neglecting them the tools and the understanding that they will need when the dark things come along. I can't believe that I published a book with a rabies outbreak, just a short while before we had a pandemic. And right now we're working on pitching the TV series for Scary Stories. And that's exactly what we're saying. Like that's our heart, that there's huge value in Scary Stories. And if they haven't read The Tale of Despereaux or a Tale Dark and Grim or The Graveyard Book, like they probably don't realize that that's already out there in a big way. Do you ever pull inspiration from other mediums like music? Absolutely. Joanna Newsom, Andrew Bird, The Animal Collective. Sufjan Stevens has a new album today that I can't wait to listen to after I get off this thing. Actually, I'm having a great time. I would stay forever, but like that's what I'm looking forward to today, constantly. Yes, all of the things. What is your trick to help you start writing on a day you just don't feel motivated? Oh, this is my trick. So earlier I made a comment about, or a reference to the Great British Baking Show. And recently I have had a really difficult month. I will edit a page, or even sometimes just a paragraph, and then go watch an episode of Great British Baking Show, and then edit a page and go back and forth like that. I just reward myself to make it easier, because it's tough. It's very, very tough to feel motivated. What is it that you read that gave you the inspiration to write? Matilda. I loved Matilda. That was my favorite book when I was little. It's the first book that, like, the second that I finished it, I started it back over again. Not a question, but a compliment. My daughter with learning disabilities absolutely loves Scary Stories for Young Foxes. That means the world to me, Christina. Thank you very much. And tell your daughter that I said hello, and hopefully I can sign a book for her someday. What a lovely way to end that. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope that this conference is everything that you want it to be and more. And when the world comes back, please don't be shy. Come and say hello. And I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us. We will start our next session right at 11 a.m. Any questions that we were not able to get to will be put up on ULA's website with those answers. Thank you again. We'll see you at 11 a.m. So sorry about that technical difficulty, everyone. Next up for our session that will start right at 11 a.m., we will be hearing from Andrea and Nick, and we will let everybody get a chance to take a break and log in. We will see you at 11 a.m.